Claire felt the words hit her like a cold wind. "You should go," Daniel had said, his voice soft but firm, almost too calm for the shock it carried. 2 weeks. Clear your head. Stay with Uncle Robert. At first, she thought she had misheard him. Maybe it was stress talking, or maybe he was joking, but there was no humor in his eyes, only that serious, almost unreadable expression that made her stomach twist. Daniel had always been practical, methodical, organized, the kind of man who planned everything down to the smallest detail, but this suggestion felt impulsive, out of nowhere, and unsettling. Claire's mind raced, flipping through every possible reason why he would say this. Was he frustrated with her? Was this some strange attempt to create space, to test their relationship? She remembered the past few months, the quiet dinners where conversation felt forced, the moments when they sat in the same room but spoke to different worlds, and the long silences that stretched further than any of their words. Maybe he had noticed how distant she had become, how her laughter didn't reach her eyes, how she had started feeling like a stranger in her own home. The idea of leaving, of going to a remote lake house with Robert, Daniel's uncle whom she, more than just 2 weeks away, it was about everything that had been left unsaid between them. Claire drove to Robert's house in a daze, the city fading behind her as the streets became quieter, the air cooler, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees growing louder than the hum of cars. Each mile felt heavier, each turn of the wheel pulling her further from the life she knew and closer to something undefined, something that might change her in ways she was not ready to predict. When she finally arrived, Robert was waiting on the porch, his posture relaxed, a gentle smile on his face, the kind that made the world feel both safe and strange at the same time. He welcomed her without questions, without probing, and somehow that made her nervous as well, because she was used to the city, to people asking questions, to conversations that filled every silence. The cabin itself smelled of pine and wood polish, the fire pit outside still with ashes from past nights, and the lake beyond shimmering under the afternoon sun, calm and endless. Claire set her bag down and turned to Robert, her chest tight, unsure whether to start talking or remain silent, unsure if this journey was a gift or a test, unsure if Daniel's suggestion was an act of love, desperation, or something else entirely. She looked at the lake, its still surface reflecting a sky full of clouds, and realized that nothing in her life had prepared her for this pause, this unexpected break that could either heal or unravel her. And as she stood there, Robert's steady gaze on her, the weight of her emotions pressing down, she understood, perhaps for the first time in years, that some decisions, especially those made for love, carry consequences no one can see until the journey begins. The car door closed behind her, the faint crunch of gravel under her feet echoing in the quiet, and in that moment, Claire felt herself teetering on the edge of something unknown, a feeling that would follow her for every step she took in the next 2 weeks. Her heart beat faster, not from excitement alone but from the anticipation of what she might discover about herself, about Daniel, about the fragile threads of her marriage, and about the quiet man who had welcomed her into his home. She did not know what awaited her, but she felt, deep in her bones, that this break, strange, unexpected, and carefully orchestrated, was the beginning of a story that would change everything she thought she knew about love, distance, and the spaces between people who care for each other. And as she crossed the threshold of Robert's house, leaving her city life behind, a sudden wind blew off the lake, sending ripples across the water, and Claire felt a shiver run down her spine, not from cold but from the knowledge that life, as she had known it, had just shifted. The first morning at Robert's house, Claire woke to a quiet that felt almost unreal, the kind of silence that wrapped around her like a warm blanket yet made her senses sharper, each creak of the floorboards and rustle of the trees outside magnified in a way that made the world feel alive and strange all at once. She dressed quickly, not out of routine, but out of a restless curiosity, and stepped outside onto the wooden porch, feeling the early air on her skin, crisp and scented with pine and wet earth. The lake stretched before her, smooth and endless, reflecting the sky in shades of pale blue and soft silver clouds, and for a moment she simply breathed, letting the tension in her chest ease slightly, like water receding after a storm. Robert was already in the kitchen when she returned, moving with calm efficiency, making coffee as though it were a ritual passed down for generations. He smiled at her without words, handing her a steaming cup, the warmth seeping into her hands and through her in ways she hadn't realized she needed. Over breakfast, he asked gentle questions about her journey and how she was feeling, but he never pressed, never rushed, and that strange combination of curiosity and patience made her feel oddly exposed yet safe at the same time. The first days passed slowly but with a rhythm that Claire began to recognize. Mornings by the lake, afternoons in the cabin with a book or a sketchpad she hadn't touched in years, evenings talking softly with Robert about everything and nothing, watching the light fade over the water. She began noticing the small details, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet confidence in his hands as he stirred coffee, the way he listened with a focus that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. She also noticed her own reactions, the way she lingered a little longer in conversations, how she laughed more freely, how she felt the tension that had gripped her for months begin to loosen, like a knot unraveling slowly. Yet, alongside that comfort, there was a quiet unease, an almost imperceptible tension she couldn't name, a whisper in the back of her mind that this break was more than just a vacation from city life, it was a test of her heart, a mirror showing truths she had been avoiding. The lake itself became a kind of companion, each morning revealing something new, the mist rising off the water, the sound of a bird breaking the silence, the way the sun touched the treetops before the rest of the world. Claire walked along the edge, feeling the sand and cool water between her toes, letting memories drift like leaves on the surface of the lake. She thought about Daniel, about the distance that had grown between them, and about the quiet longing she had buried deep inside herself for years, the yearning to feel seen and understood. Robert never intruded, but his presence was steady, like a quiet anchor in a world she had almost forgotten how to navigate, and she found herself talking about things she had not spoken aloud in months, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the fear of losing herself in roles that seemed to demand more than she could give. The more she spoke, the more she felt layers of tension peel away, revealing a side of herself she had almost lost to routines, obligations, and unspoken resentments. At night, sitting by the fireplace, the shadows dancing across the walls, she found herself observing Robert closely, the way he didn't judge, the way he offered small insights without demanding confession, the way he seemed to understand the invisible threads of her thoughts and emotions. Sometimes, she caught herself wondering if this was what it felt like to be truly known, to have someone see beyond the surface, and it both thrilled and frightened her because she knew that emotional intimacy was powerful, and power always carried risk. The more days passed, the more Claire noticed subtle changes in herself. She walked taller, spoke more freely, laughed without restraint, and even the way she looked at the lake seemed different, as if she were noticing every ripple, every reflection, every hint of light with renewed attention. Yet, with each comforting moment came a quiet unease, an echo of Daniel's voice in her mind, reminding her that this space, this calm, was temporary, that eventually she would have to return to a life where words were often left unsaid and feelings hidden beneath polite smiles. In the evenings, she sometimes caught Robert looking at her, and though it was never with anything inappropriate, there was an intensity, a gentleness, a way of seeing her that made her heart race in a quiet, confusing way she hadn't felt in years, a mixture of longing, admiration, and comfort that left her both soothed and restless. She realized that this break was revealing parts of herself she had ignored, her capacity for vulnerability, her craving for attention and understanding, and her ability to reconnect with her own emotions. And as she sat by the lake one afternoon, watching the sunlight shimmer across the water, a sense of mystery settled in around her, like the house and lake held secrets she hadn't yet discovered, like Robert himself was part of a story she was only beginning to understand. Each night, as she fell asleep to the sound of the wind in the pines and the distant lapping of the water, Claire felt an unfamiliar peace and an unfamiliar tension mingling together, knowing that this 2-week escape was changing her in ways she could not yet name, ways that would ripple into her life long after she left this place. She began to realize that Robert's quiet guidance, his steady presence, and the serenity of the lake were teaching her lessons that Daniel's love and her city life had not, lessons about honesty, self-reflection, and the courage to confront feelings she had buried. And though part of her longed for the comfort of familiarity, part of her also feared returning, because she had begun to see clearly what she had been missing, what she had been avoiding, and what her heart might truly desire. The days blurred into each other, a rhythm of calm and contemplation, small discoveries and gentle revelations, each one layering over the last, and the lake, the cabin, and Robert became a world unto themselves, a quiet stage for emotions that were patient, tender, and deep. Every conversation, every glance, every ripple on the water seemed charged with meaning she couldn't fully explain, and she began to sense that this break, suggested by Daniel with quiet insistence, was more than a pause, it was a turning point. Claire didn't yet know what would happen at the end of the 2 weeks, whether she would return to the city unchanged, whether her heart would be clearer about Daniel, or whether she would discover something new about herself that she could never take back. But she did know that in these quiet days by the lake, surrounded by the patient presence of Robert, she was awakening to a life filled with questions, emotional depth, and a sense of possibility that she hadn't realized was missing for so long, and that realization carried a weight that was both comforting and unsettling. Every morning she walked along the shore, every night she sat by the fireplace, and every shared cup of tea or quiet glance with Robert reminded her that sometimes the most important journeys happen not across distances, but within the heart, and that the calm, the mystery, and the gentle guidance she found here were slowly but surely reshaping her understanding of love, life, and herself in ways she had never imagined. As the second week approached, Claire sensed a shift, a subtle pull toward clarity, toward confrontation with the truths she had long avoided, and toward the realization that these quiet, mysterious days by the lake were not just a respite, they were a revelation, a slow uncovering of layers that would soon demand acknowledgement, understanding, and perhaps, change. And so, with each passing day, the lake reflected more than just the sky, it reflected her own heart, her own desires, and the growing awareness that sometimes, the space between people, the quiet moments, and the patient guidance of another can reveal more about yourself than years of city life, routine, and familiarity ever could, and Claire knew that by the end of these 2 weeks, nothing in her life would look exactly the same again. By the middle of the second week, Claire had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and strange, each day a mixture of calm reflection and subtle tension she could neither name nor ignore, as if the lake, the cabin, and Robert himself were conspiring to strip away the layers she had carefully built around her heart. Mornings were spent wandering along the shore, watching sunlight dance across the water, noticing the smallest movements of birds or fish, feeling the sand and cool water beneath her feet, and with each step, feeling the weight of months of unspoken feelings and quiet loneliness slowly lift, replaced by a restless curiosity about herself, about Daniel, and about the man who shared this space with her so unassumingly, yet whose presence carried a strange gravity she had not anticipated. Robert had become a constant without intrusion, a listening ear without judgment, a steady hand in a world that had been moving too fast for her to catch her breath, and Claire realized that she had begun to crave his company in ways that surprised her, ways that made her reflect on the absence of intimacy, understanding, and attention she had felt for far too long in her marriage. Conversations that started casually over tea or shared meals grew longer, deeper, and more revealing, as she spoke about her fears, her exhaustion, the quiet sadness she had buried behind smiles, and Robert responded not with solutions or advice, but with observations, gentle questions, and reflections that seemed to mirror her own thoughts back to her, making her feel seen in a way that was unfamiliar yet comforting, and sometimes unsettling. The evenings were the hardest, with the fire casting dancing shadows across the walls, and the rain often tapping softly against the windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy where words seemed heavier, more meaningful, and Claire found herself noticing every detail of Robert, how he tilted his head slightly when listening, the warmth in his eyes when she shared something personal, the subtle kindness in his gestures, and the way he seemed entirely present, without distraction, without expectation. Just being there, offering a quiet sanctuary for her mind and heart. There was no physical closeness beyond polite touches or shared spaces, yet the emotional intensity between them grew in a way that made her pulse quicken, her breath catch, and her thoughts spiral into uncharted territory, where longing and admiration mingled with guilt and confusion, a tangle of feelings she had not expected and could not easily untangle. She began to notice the changes in herself as well, the laughter that came easier, the deep sighs that escaped when she felt relief, the sudden tears that sometimes came unbidden as she reflected on years of restraint and self-denial, and the quiet moments when she realized she was imagining conversations with Daniel differently, seeing their past through a lens shaped by clarity and newfound self-awareness. The emotional tension grew with subtle triggers, a shared joke, a thoughtful comment, the way Robert would quietly step into the room as if to check on her without asking, the way he would pour her coffee just so, the way he sometimes said nothing at all but simply listened while she unburdened her mind, and each gesture built a quiet, unspoken intimacy that felt electric yet safe, confusing yet reassuring, stirring emotions she had not felt in years and leaving her wondering if she had been numb all along. She found herself staring at the lake for longer stretches, thinking of Robert, thinking of Daniel, thinking of herself, and realizing that these moments of connection were teaching her more about love, patience, and emotional honesty than any book, friend, or city experience ever had, revealing a capacity for vulnerability she had forgotten existed, and a craving for understanding that went deeper than attraction, deeper than desire, deeper than comfort. One evening, as the rain fell harder against the roof and the fire crackled between them, she asked a question that had been forming for days, tentative yet urgent. Have you ever felt completely understood by someone? Robert paused, looking at her with a gaze that was calm, steady, and honest, and his reply, simple yet profound, struck her with unexpected force. Sometimes, when we stop trying to be who the world expects and allow ourselves to be seen, we find that connection. It's rare, but it's real. The words lingered in the room, in her chest, in the space between them, and Claire felt a quiet shock at how true it felt, as if he had given voice to the feelings she had been suppressing, the ache she had carried silently, the longing for emotional closeness that was not about romance, at least not in the reckless sense, but about being witnessed fully, honestly, without judgment. The mixture of emotions became overwhelming at times: gratitude, guilt, longing, relief, admiration, and a deep, tender awareness of the human need for connection. Yet Claire recognized that the tension was not dangerous or inappropriate, but a reflection of the depth of her own feelings, the emotional richness that had been buried under years of routine and unspoken resentment, and the clarity of being able to see herself through another person's steady eyes. Evenings turned into reflections on past choices, the life she had led, the love she had received, the moments of missed understanding, and the realization that she had been settling for familiarity rather than true connection, and the presence of Robert, calm, kind, patient, and observant, acted as both mirror and guide, showing her the contrast between what had been and what might still be possible. There were quiet, almost imperceptible gestures that carried weight, the way Robert would refill her cup without being asked, the way he would pause to listen to a story she had told countless times before with genuine interest, the way he offered small comforts that went unnoticed by anyone else, the way he made ordinary moments feel significant, and each one added to the emotional tension, the subtle romantic undertone, and the growing awareness of her own vulnerability, leaving her simultaneously comforted and unsettled, safe yet yearning, grateful yet confused. Claire began to see the landscape of her own heart in ways she hadn't allowed herself to notice, the unspoken desires, the quiet hopes, the longing for understanding, the need for connection, and the unacknowledged fears, all reflected back at her through conversations with Robert, through the stillness of the lake, and through the soft, unassuming intimacy of shared moments. She realized that love and emotional connection did not always have to be dramatic or explicit to feel intense. Sometimes, it was the quiet gestures, the patient listening, the unspoken understanding that left the deepest impressions, and in those moments, she felt a mixture of emotions she had not known she could feel: admiration, longing, comfort, self-recognition, and even guilt, because she understood the precarious balance of human emotions, the thin line between appreciation, dependency, and attraction. The tension became a constant companion, a quiet rhythm underlying every interaction, every shared silence, every glance across the room, every soft word exchanged, and it filled her with both anticipation and trepidation, making her heart ache in ways that were new, deep, and profoundly moving. Claire knew that she was learning something vital about herself, that emotional honesty, vulnerability, and allowing oneself to be truly seen were gifts, but they came with weight, responsibility, and clarity, and that the journey she had been sent on by Daniel, intentional or not, was pushing her to confront feelings she had buried, questions she had avoided, and truths about love, connection, and human need she could no longer ignore. She began to understand that emotional intimacy could exist without physical intimacy, that longing could be as simple as being recognized, being heard, being understood, and being valued, and that these feelings could be transformative, awakening parts of the soul that had been dormant for years, waiting only for a quiet space and a patient companion to surface. And as the fire crackled, the rain fell softly, and the lake shimmered under the evening sky, Claire realized that her heart was stirring, not with reckless desire, but with a tender awareness of what it meant to feel truly connected, what it meant to be seen, and what it meant to recognize the complexity of human emotion, the depth of longing, and the fragile, beautiful power of love in its many forms. The days continued in this rhythm, each one layering new insights, new emotions, new questions about herself, about Daniel, and about the delicate dance of connection, until Claire could feel the culmination of the 2 weeks approaching, knowing that the emotional and romantic tension she had experienced with Robert was both a gift and a challenge, a reflection of the depth of her own heart, and a reminder that the journey she was on was leading her toward truths that could no longer remain unspoken or ignored, and that the choices she made in the coming days would shape not only her understanding of love but also her understanding of herself and what she truly needed to feel alive, seen, and whole. Halfway through the second week, Claire felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread, the lake reflecting the sky in soft hues of blue and gray, as if the world itself sensed the shift that was coming, and when her phone buzzed with Daniel's call, her chest tightened in a way she hadn't felt for days. Hearing his voice, soft and hesitant, made her heart lurch, a blend of longing, worry, and curiosity twisting inside her like a storm, because the distance, the calm, and the emotional clarity she had found with Robert had made her more aware of everything she had been avoiding at home, and now she was about to face the very source of that tension, the man who had sent her here with a simple, yet complicated, suggestion. "I need to tell you something," Daniel said, his tone trembling slightly, revealing vulnerability she rarely heard, and she could sense the weight of unspoken words pressing down on both of them. As she listened, he admitted that he had been struggling too, that the long silences, the distance in their marriage, and the quiet frustrations had been growing inside him for months, perhaps years, and that he had suggested she stay with Robert not because he wanted to be rid of her, but because he feared he was losing her, and he didn't know how to face the truth or repair the gaps between them without giving her space to breathe and reflect. Claire felt her emotions shift, a wave of relief mixed with guilt, confusion, and love, because Daniel's honesty, fragile and raw, mirrored what she had been realizing in her own heart, that love was not only about presence, but about understanding, empathy, and the courage to confront difficult truths, and that sometimes, distance was the only way to see the shape of one's feelings clearly. After the call, she turned to Robert, who had been quietly reading nearby, and she found in his calm eyes a reflection of what she had suspected all along. This trip, the lake, the quiet, the emotional depth, had been designed not as a test of temptation, but as a mirror for self-discovery and marital reflection, and his nod, gentle and knowing, confirmed that she was beginning to understand the layers of intention behind Daniel's unusual suggestion. The realization hit her like a gentle but firm wave. Robert had been a guide, not a rival, a presence meant to help her see herself more clearly, to reconnect with her emotions, and to recognize the subtle truths of her marriage, and in that instant, Claire felt gratitude, clarity, and a renewed sense of purpose, all mingling in her chest, a mixture of emotions she hadn't expected but deeply welcomed. As she walked along the lake that afternoon, the cool water brushing her fingers, the mist rising gently off the surface, Claire reflected on her journey, the quiet conversations, the long mornings of reflection, the evenings by the fire, the subtle yet powerful emotional connection she had felt with Robert, and the new understanding of her own heart, her desires, and the challenges in her marriage that had once seemed insurmountable. She thought about Daniel, his quiet vulnerability, the fear he had admitted, the love he had shown through his concern, and she realized that sometimes love required letting go in order to see clearly, allowing space to reflect, and the courage to face truths that were easier to ignore in the rush of daily life. The major twist, she understood, was not about infidelity, temptation, or betrayal, but about honesty, awareness, and emotional awakening. It was about realizing that the connections we need are not always the ones we expect, that guidance can come from unexpected sources, and that the heart's journey often involves confronting uncomfortable truths before it can find clarity, peace, or reconciliation. That evening, as she and Robert shared a quiet dinner, she felt a sense of closure with the emotional tension she had been carrying, an understanding that their connection had been meaningful, transformative, and profound, but not in a romantic or inappropriate way. It had been a catalyst, a mirror, a safe space for her to confront her own feelings, and the twist lay in recognizing that the entire experience had been orchestrated not to separate her from her life, but to bring her closer to it. With honesty and insight, she thought about the words Daniel had spoken, the way he had trusted her to take this break, and the courage it had required for both of them to admit the cracks in their relationship, and she understood that vulnerability, though frightening, was the foundation for growth, reconciliation, and deeper love. Over the next few days, Claire reflected on everything she had learned, the power of silence, the necessity of patience, the importance of emotional honesty, the subtle ways in which someone can teach us about ourselves without saying too much, and the realization that love was not simply about comfort or routine, but about seeing clearly, acting with intention, and nurturing understanding, even when it required stepping back, letting go, or facing difficult emotions. The twist had changed her perspective completely. What had felt like distance, like emotional tension, like potential confusion, had actually been a gift, a structured pause that allowed her to see the fragility and beauty of human connection, the depth of her feelings for Daniel, and the value of the emotional intimacy she had rediscovered with herself, guided by Robert's steady presence. She realized that this understanding would shape every choice she made going forward, from how she communicated with Daniel to how she approached her own desires, emotions, and sense of self, and that the lessons learned here could not be undone, only embraced and integrated into her life. Claire knew that when the 2 weeks ended, she would return not simply to her apartment or her routines, but to a relationship and a life that required honesty, effort, and openness, and that the major twist, the revelation of Daniel's vulnerability and intention, was a turning point, a moment that clarified the meaning of the past days, the emotional tension, and the introspection she had experienced. She walked along the lake once more, feeling the breeze against her face, the water rippling gently under the afternoon sun, and she understood that life, like the lake, could be calm and still on the surface while holding depth, movement, and change beneath, and that this pause, this carefully crafted break, had revealed the currents of her own heart, the complexity of love, and the strength required to face truth without fear. As the final days approached, Claire felt a growing sense of resolution, not certainty, but clarity. She understood that the connection with Robert had been temporary, but invaluable, a mirror, a guide, and a reminder of what she could feel, what she could be, and what she deserved in love, understanding, and emotional presence. And though the story was far from over, and the future still uncertain, she walked with a steadiness she hadn't felt in months, carrying with her the lessons of honesty, reflection, and emotional awakening, knowing that the major twist had not only revealed Daniel's heart but also her own, and that the choices ahead would be guided by the depth of insight she had gained, the clarity of emotion she had rediscovered, and the enduring truth that sometimes distance,